Let's bring in Julie Mason and Steve Chaggaris in our Washington bureau. Julie is host of the Press Pool on SiriusXM Radio's POTUS channel. And Steve is our CBS News senior political editor. Welcome to you both. I'm going to try and contain my giddiness at having both of you on the show. All right, so much business to attend to, ladies and gentlemen. We heard Secretary Price, first of all, saying he disagrees strenuously with the projections, and then Speaker Ryan saying he's encouraged by them. Is this a discrepancy here? I mean, on the one hand, Julie, you have someone saying, yeah, the numbers, we're not so sure about them. On the other hand, you have Speaker Ryan saying the exact opposite. Yeah, we're good with that.
Elaine, I think they didn't have a chance to get together and organize their message discipline in time for the CBO report to come out. I also heard Joe Barton, congressman from Texas, on TV tonight saying that the CBO has never been right. This is a problem for the Republicans, no matter how much Paul Ryan or Tom Price or Joe Barton tries to spin it. And one of the long-term problems is that the more that they discredit the CBO, that's going to be a problem for them someday. One of these days, they're going to need the CBO, and they're going to have completely delegitimized it through this process.
Yeah, Steve, what do you think about that? I mean, you know, this is an organization, for people who aren't familiar, that is widely considered nonpartisan and independent.
Right, and their job really is to give guidance to members of Congress as to what they're going to be voting on and what they're considering in terms of legislation. And yes, they are strictly nonpartisan. I think to get to your original question, though, the difference in message between Tom Price and Paul Ryan, and frankly, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, who are saying the same things tonight, they have two different audiences. Tom Price is speaking on behalf of the administration and is trying to tell the American people, especially Trump supporters, that the CBO has not scored this properly and they're not doing this correctly. And Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell have Republicans in Congress they have to convince to support this bill. They've got an uphill battle. They've had an uphill battle, and this CBO report doesn't make it any easier, mainly because skittish Republicans are going to look at this and say, what reason do we have to jump on board now when you're basically handing the Democrats a political argument against us when we run for re-election in 2008 and down the road?
Well, Julie, in that 60 Minutes clip we just heard from 2015, then candidate Trump says, I'm going to take care of everybody. How does the administration square that with the projections we saw on Monday?
I know. One of their calculations, Elaine, is that repealing Obamacare will be more politically important, more significant for the president than what they replace it with. But when you're taking away a benefit from that many people, potentially, I mean, even if the CBO is off a little bit, that is a really difficult blow for the Republicans to weather. And of course, it also underscores the fact that campaigning is so much easier and more fun than governing. President Trump also said recently that no one had any idea how complicated health care was. I think a lot of people in Washington did have an idea, but now the Republicans have talked themselves into a corner on this. They want to get it done as fast as possible and move on to tax reform.
Steve, on a different topic, the president signed an executive order Monday to reorganize the executive branch, giving his budget director authority to eliminate unnecessary agencies. What do you make of the timing of this particular order?
Well, we're supposed to see this week President Trump is going to send his budget outline to Congress later this week. And reportedly in there are going to be major cuts to the size of the federal government and to the agencies. And this is basically him saying, putting everybody on notice that we're going to make this government smaller. He's talked a lot about during the campaign and during his presidency, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, but especially in this case, waste. You know, this is basically him telling Congress, we are moving forward with this idea of cutting the size of government. Now, keep in mind, the president doesn't set the budget. The Congress is the one that actually sets the budget. And there are a lot of members, including 535 in both the Senate and the House, who have their own interests at heart here. And to think that this federal government is going to be cut to the level that Donald Trump wants it to be, I think is folly. I think we all know it's very, very hard to shrink the size of government because everybody has their own interests in Congress. So it'll be an interesting fight to watch. Trump has sort of laid this marker with this executive order.
I want to turn to the latest on the president's claims that the Obama administration targeted him in a wiretap. Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett filed this report earlier from the White House. Take a listen.
Elaine, as you and everyone in our audience already know, it's been more than a week since President Trump's startling set of tweets that Saturday morning alleging that his phones at Trump Tower were tapped and that President Obama ordered that. In one of the tweets, President Trump suggested that this was a Watergate-like crime of that magnitude, that significance, which of course led to Richard Nixon's resignation, the only American president to have that happen to him. So, ever since then, there has been a concerted effort to try to find out what, if any, evidence exists to back up this claim. And that was part of my questions to Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary. Today's the deadline. What's the president going to do?
Well, let's be clear. The Department of Justice was asked to send information down to Congress. It wasn't the White House that was asked to do that. Just so we're clear as far as what the request was. I understand that, and with the tweet,
obligation, as Senator McCain said,
right,
to clear this up.
And I think if you look at the president's tweet, he said very clearly, quote, wiretapping, in quotes. The president was very clear in his tweet that it was, wiretapping. That spans a whole host of surveillance types of options.
What you're saying is the president doesn't have an obligation to provide any
No,
evidence.
I'm not saying that at all. Not at all. What I'm saying is the request that was made from the House was to the Department of Justice. I think that that's an appropriate question to ask them. What I'm telling you is, from a White House perspective, there's no question that there have been an abundance of reports regarding surveillance and other type of activities that occurred during the 2016 election.
And that leads us to believe that the president's only evidence are these reports.
No, that leads you to believe that.
Many other reporters followed up that line of questioning, and among the things we learned was that the president hasn't even directed the Justice Department to provide any evidence to the House Intelligence Committee. And, interestingly, today, Elaine, the Justice Department, on the deadline day set by the House Intelligence Committee, said it needed more time to determine what, if any, responsive documents may exist. That committee, the House Intelligence Committee, will give the Justice Department until March 20th to provide the evidence, because that's when the first public hearing about Russian interference in the 2016 election and possible wiretapping or surveillance will be held.
All right, our Major Garrett there. Stephen, Julie, President Trump posted those tweets more than a week ago. He has not tweeted on the subject since and has ignored shouted questions about his claims. How should we interpret his silence on this matter? Julie, I imagine you have some thoughts.
Yeah, he avoided reporters all last week. He has, as you mentioned, he hasn't taken questions on this. This is a problem for the White House. And now, today, we've seen Sean Spicer with this new, I would call it the air quotes defense, as described in Major Garrett's piece, that wiretapping is a non-specific allegation. No, it's a very, very specific allegation. That March 20 hearing that Major Garrett mentioned is going to be such an important one for this entire process. Comey's going to be there. I think Brennan's going to be there, the whole gang. I think even Sally Yates has been called to testify. I do suspect, though, that all of this with Russia, with these wiretapping allegations, are going to have an unsatisfactory ending for Washington. It's just going to be one of these things that leads to endless hearings and investigations. But how do you prove a negative? And that's the problem for critics of President Trump on this. And that's what he's counting on.
Yeah, Steve, what do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting. It's almost like, you remember that Trump and his tweets, it's like a stream of consciousness for him, right? And these are Saturday morning tweets, reportedly at a time when he was very upset with what had been going on in terms of messaging around Jeff Sessions, and he fired these tweets off. And now it's almost a week and a half later, and it's almost like, let's just pretend that we weren't being totally literal when we tweeted that stuff around. And the messaging has been sort of muddled and not really, no one's able to really explain what he meant. I just think it becomes a credibility problem for the president if he continues to do this kind of thing. And again, they like to say, don't take him literally. Well, okay, fine, but you're going to tweet that kind of stuff out, especially when you're accusing a former president of wiretapping you. You got to be able to sort of back that up, right? And so we'll see what the Justice Department comes up with next week when they send over the quote evidence to the House Intelligence Committee. But if there's nothing there, I think the White House would just be happy if everybody just moved on and forgot about it. And maybe Trump's supporters will be fine. Look, we weren't taking him literally. We understand that there are maybe people who are trying to undermine President Trump. But a lot of other people, including people on Capitol Hill that he needs to work with, I think are going to question his credibility if he doesn't come up with something on this.
So Julie, that leads me to my next question. Is there a political consequence for this particular president when he makes an unsubstantiated claim like that? I mean, we're not just talking about the wiretapping allegation. We're also talking about, allegations of widespread voter fraud, for instance.
Right. Everything from the size of his inaugural crowd to the allegations of millions of illegals voting in the election. He has a pre-existing credibility problem. The question is, will there be a political cost for that? It's really hard to say. It hasn't hurt him so far. His believers still like what he's doing. They still think that he's fulfilling his promises. I'm not sure when there is a consequence for this. I guess we have to see.
I mean, Steve, if his believers make enough noise and if they continue to stand by him, right? He's the person who famously said as a candidate he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and people would still be supporting him. I mean, so
well,
is it fair to measure him with the same kind of metrics when you talk about things like political consequences, when you talk about things like credibility? Is it a different standard?
Well, maybe the rules have changed. I mean, it's hard to say. It worked for him, obviously, to get elected. Granted, he did not win the popular vote, but he won. And he is president, even after all of his, as Julie put it, pre-existing credibility issues. The question is have the rules changed? Is there so much news coming at people so fast? Are people paying that close of attention to what this president is tweeting about that it affects their day-to-day opinions of him, or are they just looking for results? That is, I think, going to be the ultimate question. What are the results of Donald Trump's presidency, and how do they affect voters at the end of the day? I think that's ultimately going to be what people decide on what they think of Donald Trump when they go into to the voting booth, whether it's in 2018 for the midterms or when Trump runs for re-election. I'm not sure that everybody's processing everything that we're processing in real time and as in detail as we are. And maybe the rules have changed just because there's so much information coming at everybody.
All right, we know you'll continue to watch it. Steve Chaggaris and Julie Mason in Washington. So delightful to have you both. Please come back. I really love having you here.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you.